All right, I'm Adam McNeilly.
I'm Matt McKenna.
And we're going to be talking about behind the screen, the humans who use our code. So this is a very non-technical presentation talking about how we as programmers should be thinking about our end users. Because without them, our apps wouldn't exist. And I think there's a lot of considerations we need to make about our users that may not be obvious to us up front, and that's what we'll talk about. But before we go further, I have to embarrass Matt. It's his first conference talk. Everyone give it up for him. Volume.
All right, so we're all here to talk about Android, and we're going to start that off with defining a couple things for this talk. There's a lot of ways that people use Android, and there we go. And one of the main ones is consumer apps. And so a consumer app is something that is essentially available to whoever has a phone. They can go, they can download, they can interact with, and do something with the device. Anything that they want to do, they pretty much have free reign to do so. If they don't want to use it, they don't have to. It's something that is available and accessible to pretty much anyone. Next up, commercial tools. These are ones that are going to be a little bit more gated. They're going to have a different set of users and a different sets of interactions. Things like barcode scanners or points of sale, where the people interacting with Android are going to do so in a different way because they're doing so for a purpose rather than for their own needs. Internal solutions, we don't have a picture of the Netflix internal solution, but it's our prime example of they develop in-house software to help manage their studio times and different coordinations to actually film all of their stuff, organize their sets, things like that. And they actually use Kotlin multi-platform for that. And if you're interested in reading more about that, there's a couple articles out there that we can link you later.
And another way people interact with Android is through something we kind of called hidden Android, which is times you interact with it in the wild without even realizing it. So I forgot I think this was a Tonal screen that we used here, but things like Tonal, Peloton, they all use Android. A lot of fast food order kiosks, you go to McDonald's and you try to order, that's running Android. And we may not even realize we're interacting with it.
Yeah, and then actually I was fortunate to be able to go to DroidCon Berlin this year, and the airplane entertainment display you can see is running some form of Android. We have a dialogue here that pops up, and then on the right or right-hand side for you is a really old Android dialogue from Donut, I believe.
Yes.
So it's out there and it's wild.
Yep. That's definitely not running Jetpack Compose.
Yeah, but none of these are all strictly mutually exclusive buckets. Different apps can span different ones of the different categories.
Right, and as a result, because we have all these different form factors, they require different considerations. And even if you think you're only developing for one of these, a lot of us probably work on consumer apps, it's still important to think about the different considerations of the different ways people use Android, because that might become important. You might work for a company that has a consumer app, but also an auto app, or maybe some of your own in-house hardware and things like that.
Yeah, and so the device itself can define how Android is being used, but also everyone also will use a device in their own way. So how I use my devices will differ from how you use yours, what your preferences are, how you organize things, how you even type on your keyboard. Some people go versus using the thumbs. There's a whole mix out there, and it's something that we have to be aware of.
Yeah, and it's also important to think usage between users is not static either. How we use our own device can change over time. And a really great sort of presentation of what we mean by that is this explanation of different types of accessibility concerns. So if we look at the one at the top left, and we're talking about touch, you may have people who have one arm who are limited in their touch capabilities as a result, right? But then we also have temporary things, maybe I'm injured and I don't have access to my arm for a little while, but I still need to work around that. Or situational, you're a new parent, you're holding your kid, you still only have one arm to work with. And you can look at the other examples up here, but it's really important to think about that difference between permanent, temporary, and situational. I think, at least in my experience, when we talk about accessibility features, we focus a lot on these sort of permanent disabilities that people face. But it's not limited to them, right? You might think to yourself, as an able-bodied person with two hands, oh, it's okay that this requires 2 touch targets, I can deal with that. But if you ever have to take care of your kid, you're gonna be wow, why did I really think about that? So it's important to remember these features that we work on, these accessibility features and other concerns, they really do impact everyone. And it speaks to this broader idea that we want to cover in this talk about caring for your users. Really thinking about like the end users, the people who are going to use your application, beyond just thinking about building it and all that brings, but thinking about the people who are going to be on the receiving end of all the work you do and making sure the work you do helps them.
Yeah, and part of caring for our users is continually updating their devices, their apps, everything that they want to have an experience, meeting them where they are and developing for them. And app updates are a big part of that. And so giving them new features, new functionality is usually a good thing, but it's not always a good thing. And some of the reasons why is, especially some of these use cases like the commercial tools, there's going to potentially be manuals written around this software and how it looks and what to click on. And you can go and release a new design system, publish something, add a new button somewhere, and people could get confused because they're not using this every single day. They use it for a purpose, and they have to go and they have to reference this material, which could take a long time to change, and it could be costly for your customer as well.
Right. And maybe a better example of how app updates can be harmful that hits close to home is, have you ever tried to help your parents after they get a software update? Like, we all know this can be difficult. I think you might have had a couple things to say about this one.
Yeah, I mean, there's different ways that people will do this, but for me personally, I will write down a step-by-step guide, and if something changes, my family will learn how to navigate this, but then we'll need to relearn it, and I'll need to update that guide. So I've been through this in my own experiences.
And it doesn't always need to be a complicated change. It can be simple as moving a button can disrupt someone's flow enough that they just don't know what to do. And that can create sort of a distrust in our products, and that's definitely something we don't want. We had another example of this that, again, maybe we can empathize with, but I remember when the Android 12 system UI came out, everyone complained about this on Twitter. And it's really not different from what used to be there. They just made the buttons bigger, but a lot of people were very upset by that. And it's just something to think about. We might have good intentions when we build an app update. We might think we're improving it, but if we're not really talking to our users or at least being conscious of how they might feel, we could have the opposite problem. Our updates have impacts, is what we're saying, and maybe we think updates are a positive impact, but that's not always true. And I think it's important we just question that as we're building them.
Yeah, and I know we all want to release the newest features, but really, I want to drive home the point that caring for your user might mean improving the product with how they know how to interact with it. Because you switching up someone's muscle memory on something, they'll go to change where something is placed, it can really mess with the flow and interrupt the experience versus improving it. Yeah,
and with that, it leads to this idea of discovery within our apps. So if you make an update, how do you make your users aware of that? Or if you change something, how do they know? Or if they're using it for the first time, how do they understand how your app works? Or a better question, what do we teach our users?
Yeah, and how do we teach our users? Because as people who are fairly familiar with this technology, there's a lot of things that we implicitly understand about how the system works, about what is touchable, what is draggable, what is swipeable.
Right, and so thinking about the importance of teaching our users, it's also worth considering why would we want to do this? This might not be something we understand right away, the idea of teaching our users. Well, a good example is a view pager. So we're all Android developers. We all probably know how this works, but can anyone really tell me, looking at the screenshot, that you can swipe that? I've read about user research studies where they put screens like this in front of people, tell them to go to object 4, 99% of people, that's exaggerating, but a very large number of people will tap on the tab at the top that says object 4. But as developers, because we're familiar with it, we know that I can also swipe. But that's not visible. And so there are other examples, once you start to think about that are going to pop up everywhere.
Yeah, well, real quick. Let alone the swipeable behavior is a default to View Pager, whereas I know I've had to implement and disable the swipe feature for various reasons, but you're changing what some people might take as, oh, I want to swipe this, and others might not even know they can do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I can talk about this. So another example where once you start to conceptualize this idea, things your users might not understand, you'll also realize this applies to iconography. So I pulled this great picture from like the Google Fonts page, but what I'm upset is this doesn't have a picture of the save icon. So I know many people in the room here probably understand why the save icon is what it is, but all these kids who are growing up using mobile device for the first time, they've never seen a floppy disk, right? So the save icon, they may learn through functionality what it does, but that icon means nothing to them. And there are probably other examples of times you see an icon that you understand, you've interacted with whatever that may be, but that's not sort of intrinsically apparent to everyone else. Another example of that is this one.
Yeah, so we all know you can copy paste C and V are two very well-traveled keys on a keyboard, but the recent generations are dealing much more with soft keyboards, and their copy paste is a long press in a text view, and they might not have the same muscle memory of knowing how to interact with that. And so it's just calling out these little things that we probably take for granted because of what we've experienced.
Yeah. I believe what you said at the speaker dinner last night was kids these days don't know keyboard shortcuts. And that's what prompted us to throw this slide in there. Well, let's talk about another example that is not super technical that I know we can deal with. I've dealt with it several times already today. Doors. Okay, everyone knows what we mean here. Like,
which way does this door go?
Yeah. On our way to the talk, I watched Matt pull a push door, and like 5 minutes before we got here. Yeah, and I did it earlier too.
The speaker door is crazy.
But this is a really good point. Like, I'm convinced that a lot of people who build doors just don't think about it. And that's the problem, right? We need to think about who's going to use what we're building, and we're not always going to get it perfect, right? But as long as we're asking ourselves that question and sort of being conscious about what assumptions they may or may not have, we'll build a better product.
And so, in addition to this, people who use Android a lot, or people who frequent a building a lot, will know which way the door is going to go. Like they have that familiar pattern of use, where someone who's maybe new to it or is using Android for work or as a commercial tool or something else, and it's not their primary platform, we just need to keep that in mind, that things might not come as naturally for them.
Mm-hmm. So with all that in mind, we can talk a little bit about, maybe ways we can think about, well, how do we educate our users? How do we show them how to use our products? And one that you may see a lot is this idea of like a product showcase, where we highlight specific buttons and interactions and walk the user through step by step. You want to talk about this one?
Yeah, so I think these are generally a really good pattern, but I think they're very easy to abuse. So if you ever go to a new web page or a new app and they have one of these and they're like, hey, let's take a tour, who actually goes through the tour? Like, you get through that because at that point you're blocking your user from doing what they are trying to do or just interact with the app. And so trickling them this information as they come across different parts of the app is what we would think is the best way to do this, and not going through like, here's steps 1 through 5 of how to use this tool.
So you'll sometimes see this on apps. Maybe you open a screen for the very first time, or one we found in the wild was like the direct message feature on Twitter. So in a Twitter DM, you can react to a message someone sends you. And if you click on the little heart plus icon, the reaction icon, it comes up with the emojis here, and it says, add a reaction by double tapping any message. And that's because there's a different way to get into this functionality. I can double tap. That's not what I did. But instead of like stopping me and saying, hey, double tap to react, it's just this subtle little label letting me know that this exists. And if I do double tap on a message, it's not there, because there's nothing new to teach me. This is very subtle. It doesn't interrupt my user flow at all, but it's just a really great way to help surface that information to me. And going back, like, product tours are not always bad, but again, just kind of asking yourself that question, like, is it really worth it? I'd say a lot of times no. But as long as you're asking that question, you'll get to the right answer.
And it depends on the use case, because maybe the product tour is something that's correct for an internal solution or a commercial tool, so that you can onboard new team members when they go through an app. There's maybe a tutorial wizard. But the whole point is to help your users without hindering them.
Right. And that's because like they want to use our apps, right? The other thing with product tours is like when I download an app, there's obviously some reason I want to use it. And when I upload it, or when I open it for the first time and I see this product tour, I can't get into it. I can't do what I came there for. And that's a big problem. And speaking of trying to do things and not being able to, this DroidCon talk is sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends. I'm sorry, can you talk about this?
throwing big interstitial ads in between views of your screens is also going to add friction to you using or anyone using a product.
Right.
And we want to advise against them. This is a joke for this purpose, but it is something that you deal with. You'll go through and you'll be navigating. People will get the ads popped up, and it breaks their flow. It literally hinders them from completing what they want to do and slows down their process.
Right, and it follows the same theme. Like, ads do serve a purpose, especially on the company side. They make us money. As a user, every once in a while, I see a sponsored ad that actually does benefit me. So it's just trying to strike that balance. Also, random dark pattern that we had to throw on here. Don't put those tiny X buttons on your ads. Like the 1 pixel touch targets. Like, that's worse than the ad itself. And then there's like 3 more steps before I can get through. It's a whole thing. But the whole point is, like, we want to balance monetization with usability. I think a lot of times these two things are at odds with each other, but living in capitalism, like, monetization is important. So it's really about thinking about that balance. One more thing about this, I wasn't sure if you had anything to add, but like a company I worked for in the past, something someone said during a meeting that really resonated with me was, rather than trying to squeeze every penny out of our users, build a product worth paying for. And it's just a different way to think about monetization. Like, if you really believe in what you're doing and what your product has to offer, there's a market for it. And so you can leverage that rather than trying to squeeze money out of people, which will hurt you in the long run. And I think that leads to just sort of like other dark patterns that we might see that are ways we hinder our user that we probably shouldn't do. Like, the next few slides are things like, just don't do them. There's no questions about it.
Our first example, we shouldn't force portrait. Like, it doesn't work in a slide deck. It shouldn't work on your phone. There's users that are going to need to be able to use your phone in a landscape form factor. Especially even with new form factors coming out, like the tablets and Chromebooks can run Android now. Mm-hmm. Like, having that landscape functionality is going to be paramount.
And it's really not as complicated as it seems. I mean, if you want to optimize for landscape, you can, but at the very minimum, throwing all your content in some sort of scrollable view so that it is usable in landscape makes a big difference for people who might, for any number of reasons, be unable to use their phone in this direction. And I know we're all guilty, like, I've done it. Let's talk about another one. Anyone seen this before? Like, everyone who uses TikTok.
Yeah, well, so TikTok's an interesting example because pressing back actually takes you to a new one. And so that's an interesting feedback loop to try to retain you inside the app. But in general, like, messing with system functionality, you're, again, interrupting the flow of the user with what they're expecting to happen and asking them to pay attention to this. And toasts might not be the most accessible thing either. So any user who isn't able to interact or understand or deal with this quickly, it's not going to be a good experience for them.
Mm-hmm. And so a relatively similar one around changing system behavior that can be wrong is like non-dismissible dialogues. I've seen apps that pop up a dialogue to show you some information, and instead of like being able to press back to close it or click outside the dialogue, you like have to hit OK. And I think like maybe that's okay. What was the example we gave? Amber Alerts. You should probably make sure people read those. But again, just asking that question. I've definitely seen this behavior when it's not necessary. And then it just makes me frustrated with the product. And it's, you want to go?
Yeah, sure. So that gets us to, should we force behaviors? How do we end up making everyone who's using our product happy when they might be using it differently?
Yeah, so an idea of how we can support that is the idea of like setting screens. Maybe you have like sort of default functionality of your app, but you have people who want it to behave differently, and so how do you make both of these people happy? Like, how do you give this customization option to people who want it, but also just being able to let people use your app? And an example from the settings is like the wallpaper and style page on Android 12. So my wallpaper works by default based on whatever my background image is, but I have the chance to go in here and choose to use dynamic themes, toggle dark theme. I could just use basic colors. Like, all of this is up to me. And so we've spent the time to make it so that I can decide how I want it to work.
Yeah. This is locked to portrait, by the way.
Yeah.
Just want to call it out. It's
Fun
the official,
Yeah.
system app.
So Google is definitely guilty of this, I think. Did I miss anything? I don't think so.
We got just one more call out where, as you're introducing new functionality, this is labeled beta. Themed icons are a new feature of Android 13. You could go and add them now, but they're not widely adopted yet. And so some users are going to be okay with that, but not all are. So instead of just straight up enabling that for everyone, there's an option to turn that on for users who maybe don't care if everything is not uniform and still want to see what's out there, or maybe they don't want it at all.
Yeah, and this is a general thing to consider a lot, which is this idea of, opt-in versus opt-out. And, when you release the feature, what should be the default? Like, should everybody get this, and then they have to go manually turn it off? Or do we leave it off and let people know, hey, you can go turn this on? Maybe a more obvious example is like location sharing. For a lot of things, that is off by default. That is something that we don't want to share, but we can go opt into that. I think it would be a really dark pattern if we're like, we're going to start tracking location. You can turn it off, but we're going to turn it on without your permission. Like, try not to do that. And again, just kind of ask yourself that question. But related to settings in general is this idea.
Yeah, so it just works versus it works how I want. So some users are just going to download the app, use it as it is and not worry about the customization. They just want a product that functions. And others are going to dive into the settings screen and see if they can tweak functionality or different colors, like actual functionality, like core processes, and make it more tailored to their use case.
Yeah. So I know that was a lot to cover, a lot of different pieces of functionality we talked about, different considerations we have to make. But I think we can actually recap this in like one simple idea. You want to talk?
Yeah, so ask questions. Don't just build what you're being asked to build. There's a lot that you know as an engineer working on a product and what is available inside the platform, and being able to meet those users where they are, keep them in mind, and don't let some of these dark patterns sneak in.
Yeah, I think that's definitely like a piece of advice I got early on in my career that kind of stuck with me. As you're a junior developer and you're first learning how to build things, like that's your focus. I want to learn how to code, I want to learn how to build apps, and so I focus on that. And so maybe you're the person where your product designer or a senior engineer comes to you and says, hey, we want to build this dialogue. By the way, the only way to exit is through this OK button. And you're a new developer and you're new, so you just do it. And like that's fine, that's kind of understandable. But also because we trust the people who bring these ideas to us. We trust that product kind of did their research on this thing. And maybe they did, but it's important to just ask those questions, And then the more you ask them, the more you'll be aware of these dark patterns and why we should or shouldn't do things. Like I said, it'll kind of make you a better engineer in general. So I think, was that it? Is there anything else you want to talk about?
I mean, yeah, you're the last line of defense, basically, when these things come to you. And thinking about that from a safety standpoint and everything, it's really important.
Yeah. Is it time to end the slides?
I think it's time to end the slides. Oh,
that's awkward. All right, that's everything.
Cool.
Thank you.